Hi everyone, welcome to the last lecture of Bio 101. Unfortunately, since we are so close to the end of the semester, we do need to go ahead and do a lecture today, even though y'all are at home. So instead of doing the normal clicker routine with iClicker, I've actually put the clicker questions on Google Classroom as a quiz. So as you listen to the lecture, go through the quiz questions and answer them as prompted. At the end of the lecture, you'll submit the quiz to me for your participation points. So we are going to start off with a few clicker questions. The first one, pictured above are three mammals that share a common mammalian ancestor. The arm has been adapted and evolved to serve different functions. These arms are known as what? A. Vestigial structures, B. Convergent evolution, C. Disruptive selection, D. Homologous structures, or E. Analogous structures. So if you need to during this lecture, feel free to pause the video so you can go over to the quiz on Google Classroom and answer the questions. Okay, so the answer to this is D, homologous structures. So they started off with a common ancestor and then diverged to slightly different form and function depending on the organism. Okay, so we've talked about mutation and genetic drift. So we are halfway through with the mechanisms that induce evolution. So today we're going to talk about migration and natural selection. So first, another clicker or review question. New traits and new alleles are mainly created by what? A, mutation, B, genetic drift, C, gene flow, D, natural selection, or E, evolution. Once again, please use the quiz posted on Google Classroom to answer the clicker questions. Okay, so the answer is a mutation. So mutation is what forms the new traits and new alleles and ultimately new organisms. Another one, construction of the PATH, Potomac Appalachian Transmission High Line Power Line, has isolated 50 sow bugs from its original population of 15,000. These isolated sow bugs begin breeding and thus establish a new population. What type of evolutionary mechanism was inflicted on these sow bugs? Is it A, bottleneck, B, founder effect, C, genetic drift, D, both bottleneck and genetic drift, or E, both founder effect and genetic drift? Okay, so the answer is E, both founder effect and genetic drift. So migration is also called gene flow, and it is the movement of some individuals of a species from one population to another. There are many examples of man-made structures, mountains, bodies of water, deserts, the Grand Canyon, etc., that serve as physical barriers that prevent gene flow. If migrating individuals can survive and reproduce in the new population and also carry a different proportion of alleles than the individuals in their new home, then the recipient population experiences a change in allele frequencies and consequently experiences evolution. And because alleles are simultaneously lost from the initial population, that population too will experience a change in the allele frequencies. So in the picture here, we have number one, before migration, the alleles of a population separated by a mountain range. But if a chunk of population 1 migrates over the mountain range and joins population 2, we see an increase in the green allele for population 2 and a decrease in the green allele in population 1 because it lost a whole bunch of individuals that had that. So some examples of migration include pollen spreading to different areas, such as across a road. Also, we've seen examples with the Great Wall of China and the Berlin Wall, which separated populations. Especially once the Berlin Wall came down, they did notice a change and migration of population occurring that changed allele frequencies in populations on either side of the wall. All right, another clicker question. Remember the Dunkers, we mentioned them yesterday. They are the West Germans that settled in Pennsylvania. They only marry within the sect, but you can convert to their religion and join them and then marry someone as well. So which of these would be an example of gene flow? A, two Dunkers with type O and type A blood marry and have children. B, a Dunker child is born with a rare mutation that creates a new blood type. C, I am type AB and I fall in love with a Dunker. I convert to his faith and have kids. Or D, a Dunker child with type A blood dies and his parents adopt a non-Dunker child with type A blood. Okay, so the answer to this one is C. In this case, I am bringing my type AB blood as well as my other alleles into the population and helping to change the allele frequencies through migration or gene flow. Next clicker question. Which of these cannot increase the variety of alleles in a population? Is it A, mutation, B, gene flow, C, founder effect, or D, all of the above, which cannot increase the variety of alleles in a population? Once again, if you need to pause these while you think about it, go ahead and do so. Okay, so the correct answer for this one is C, the founder effect. Remember, in founder effect, only a small proportion of the population leaves and goes to form a new population elsewhere, and they will likely have a different frequency of alleles from the original home population. All right, our fourth agent of evolutionary change is natural selection. So when I say natural selection, what comes to mind? Do you have any preconceived notions? Have you heard of survival of the fittest? So we'll definitely be talking about survival of the fittest in this lecture and what that actually means. And so in the picture here, we see a whole bunch of snail shells with lots of color variations. All right, there are three conditions that must be met in order for evolution to occur by natural selection. And these may seem like common sense, but they weren't classified until Darwin's time. So first, there must be variation for a particular trait. So we can't all be exactly the same. Second, this variation must be inheritable. That is, the genes for the trait must be contained within the eggs and sperm and not just a mutation in the individual's somatic cells. Third, individuals with one version of the trait must produce more offspring than those with a different version of the trait. That is, one version of the trait must be selected for over another. So we're going to take a look at these conditions individually. Okay, so condition 1, variation for a trait. So we all know that variation is all around us. Even just looking in our classroom, we see lots of differences: hair color, eye color, height, all sorts of variation. And it's not just limited to the physical features. We also have variations in our physiology, in our biochemical pathways. So some people are lactose intolerant, meaning they can't have milk, and others aren't. Some are very susceptible to poison ivy, while others aren't. There's even behavioral variation from temperament to learning abilities to interpersonal skills. We've already discussed several ways in which variation is increased, so let's talk a little bit about those. So let's see what you remember with a clicker question, a genetics review clicker question. Natural selection depends on variation. Which of the following does not result in a greater variety of alleles in offspring? A, sexual reproduction, meaning two different parents, versus asexual reproduction, which remember is basically forming a clone of the adult. B, independent assortment of chromosome pairs during meiosis. C, crossing over, which is the genetic shuffling between chromosomes. D, mutations, or E, all of these increase variation. Okay, so the correct answer is E. So there are many ways to get variation. So the second condition that Darwin identified as necessary for natural selection was that offspring must inherit the trait from their parents. Inheritance wasn't completely understood in Darwin's time without the discovery of DNA. Still, it was not hard to see that for many traits, offspring look more like their parents than they do some other random individual in the population. As we've already mentioned, animal breeders understood inheritance before it was actually defined and would breed different individuals for a desired trait. Now we officially call transmission of traits from parents to their children through genetic information inheritance or heritability. The third condition is also called differential reproductive success. Basically, over time, the traits that lead some organisms to have greater reproductive success than others will increase in frequency in a population, while traits that reduce reproductive success will fade away. For example, if you're the runt of the litter, you are least likely to get food and grow, and if you are a small, sickly adult, even if you make it to adulthood, you will be less likely to find a mate or have enough energy or be healthy enough to reproduce. Over time, differential reproductive success means that some individuals will be more likely to reproduce than others. So another classic example is the running bunnies. So if you carry a trait that makes you a slower running rabbit, you are more likely to be eaten by the fox. Excuse me. And if running speed is a heritable trait, which we are saying it is, the next generation in a population will contain fewer slow rabbits, because the slow rabbits had been eaten by the fox before many of them could reproduce. Over time, the population is changed by natural selection. The fox starts picking off the slower rabbits. They are less likely to be able to reproduce before they are eaten. The faster rabbits are the ones that survive and the ones that are producing the next generation, and they're passing on that trait or the genes for being faster. So over time, the population evolves. Clicker time again. Which of these is not a result of natural selection? A, useful traits become more common. B, harmful traits become less common. C, new traits constantly appear. D, adaptations match the environment. E, all of the above are possible. Okay, the correct answer is C. New traits constantly appear. This does not happen as a result of natural selection. Natural selection only selects features that are more helpful, or it edits out the harmful ones. It doesn't create anything new. Okay, so what is meant by survival of the fittest? This is something you've probably heard numerous times, but what does it actually mean? So on the Google Classroom quiz form, their next question is a short answer one, saying to write a definition of what is meant by survival of the fittest. So take a moment to come up with some kind of definition. Remember, this is participation. Any response that is, logical gets points. So go ahead and take a second to do that. Then we'll discuss more what is meant by survival of the fittest. All right, survival of the fittest. A lot of times people will say like the biggest one or the strongest one. That's what survival of the fittest means. And here we have a misconception of what fitness actually means in a biological sense. So if we're thinking in a health sense, fitness might mean how fast you can run a mile or how much you can bench press or your percentage of body fat. But in biology, it's all about the reproductive success. It does not have to do with like your health or physical strength. It's the ability to reproduce well. So it's a measure of reproductive output. If you are fit, you produce more viable offspring than another individual. That's really what it is. You are better at having babies. So a clicker question. Which of the following is the most fit? So we have 4 individuals, Nemo, Finn, Marlin, and Roger. Their body size is listed, the number of gametes they produce, which remember, gametes are egg or sperm, and the number of babies that survive is listed as well. So do you think A, Nemo is the most fit, B, Finn, C, Marlin, or D, Roger? Which of the 4 is the most fit? Okay, so it is actually B, Finn. So Nemo produces a higher number of gametes than Finn does, but when we look at the number of babies that survive, Finn has the highest number of babies that survive. All right, if the least fit individuals are continuously weeded out of the population, we might logically conclude that eventually all organisms and populations will be perfectly adapted to their environment. This doesn't happen, like ever. And that's because of several different factors that will prevent populations from progressing towards perfection. One is that environments change quickly. One year may be a rainy year and the next may be very dry. Populations need variation to adapt to these changes. And actually this one is related to number 2. There may be multiple different alleles for a trait, each causing an individual to have the same fitness. That is, there could be several ways to do something, but the outcome is the same. So let's say we want to get to Canaan Valley Resort from the high school. Some people would probably go up through Thomas and Davis and then drop down into the valley and get to the resort that way, while others might decide to go down 219 towards Hamilton and run 72 and River Road over. So likely we would all get there about the same time, depending on how fast you drive in different ways. So we have the same outcome, but took different routes to get there. Just like there could be different alleles for a trait that each cause the individual to have the same fitness. Finally, variation is needed. If something is perfectly adapted to a specific environment, any slight change could be tragic. So one disease, one natural event like heavy rains or hurricanes or something like that, dry season could be disastrous. So there are other types of selection. Natural selection is where the environment determines fitness, but we do have some other types. We actually have already talked about the first one several times, even though we haven't specifically given its name of artificial selection. So we're going to explore that one first. So artificial selection is really just a specific case of natural selection. The artificial selection used by animal breeders and farmers is natural selection because the three conditions are satisfied, even though the differential reproductive success is being determined by humans, not nature. An example of artificial selection is specifically mating certain breeds of dogs. All dogs can interbreed, but we select which to mate to maintain some bloodlines and breeds. Another example involves the wild mustard plant. So as we've mentioned before, at least I think I've mentioned this before, we have selected for specific traits to give some common vegetables. So by manipulating and specifically breeding individuals for these different traits, we have come up with cauliflower and broccoli and cabbage and kale and kohlrabi. All of these are technically from the same species, but they've just been selectively bred for the characteristics we desire. The next three, directional, stabilizing, and disruptive selection, are ways in which natural selection can change the traits in a population. Most examples of directional selection are actually due to artificial selection. In directional selection, individuals with one extreme from the range of variation in a population have a higher fitness. Milk production in cows is an example. Farmers have selected cows with the highest milk production for breeding, and they tend not to breed cows with low milk production. Another example is breast size in turkeys. Poultry farmers select for larger breasts in turkeys to the point where the breast muscles have become so large they can no longer naturally mate, but rather the poultry farms must utilize artificial insemination. So this graph shows the directional selection in the case of turkeys, and the movement of the population curve is selecting for larger breast size. Along the x-axis, the x-axis shows the breast size of the turkeys. The y-axis shows the number of individuals in the population. As we select against smaller turkeys, we are pushing the traits to the other end of the extreme. Also, as we begin to eliminate these lower performers, we are decreasing variation in the population. So the width of the curve also eventually decreases. Next is stabilizing selection. And this is when we have selective pressure at both ends or at both extremes. That is, individuals with the intermediate phenotype are the most fit. The classic example of stabilizing selection is birth weight. Most babies are between 7 and 8 pounds. Babies with low and high birth weights are more vulnerable to complications. Of course, medical advances have changed this somewhat. Medical advances have actually been able to make the curve a little bit wider and eliminate some of the stabilizing selection, but still at the very extreme ends, there are concerns and possible complications. Next, we have a third type of natural selection, which individuals with the extreme phenotypes actually experience the highest fitness, and those with intermediate phenotypes have the lowest. So this is called disruptive selection, and it's actually really common in fish. Among fish species, only the largest males acquire good territories. Well, okay, among some fish species, only the largest males acquire good territories for mating and attracting females. However, some tiny males are able to sneak in and fertilize the eggs, so they are also able to reproduce. So remember, with fish, the female will lay a whole bunch of eggs into the nest habitat, and the male will reproduce or will fertilize them by releasing sperm into the water as well. So a tiny male can kind of sneak in there and fertilize the eggs before they're fertilized by the larger male. Okay, however, intermediate-sized males don't have territories and aren't able to sneak in, so they have the lowest fitness. Overall, we see an increase in the frequency of small and large fish with a reduction of the medium-sized fish. Another clicker question. Let's say you're an elephant breeder for the circus. Touring groups only want animals that are gentle and obedient, and thus you only breed animals with these traits. Over time, all of your elephants have these characteristics. What type of selection is illustrated? Is it A, directional selection, B, stabilizing selection, or C, disruptive selection? Okay, so the correct answer is a directional selection. So in this case, the trait is a temperament trait, but you are selecting for the most gentle and obedient, and thus weeding out the squirrely ones that are less gentle and less obedient. This is also an example of artificial selection because a human, you, the elephant breeder, are doing this. It's not happening in nature. Next, we have sexual selection. So sexual selection is a special case of natural selection that involves the successful obtainment of a mate. It is also referred to as mate's choice. Many species have evolved elaborate displays or behaviors to attract mates. Most often, the males have evolved traits to attract the female. Since for most species, the female invests more in the offspring either through putting large amounts of nutrients in the eggs or providing embryonic and juvenile care, the males compete to mate with the females. Females will select mates or males that have the best displays. If you ever want to see some entertaining videos, look up the Bird of Paradise mating habits. David Attenborough has narrated several videos on this, and they are pretty amusing. Sexual selection often accumulates in sexual dimorphism, in which the form of the two sexes differ. Many fish species display extreme sexual dimorphisms with attractive coloration, extended fins, etc. So on the picture on the left, we've got the male and female of 6 different species listed or pictured. We have number 1, where the male has the extended lower fin. Number 4, there's a large difference in coloration. My favorite's number 5, the anglerfish, where the male is basically a small parasite attached to the much larger female. And then we also have a male and female elephant sea, and you can see the differences in their appearance. Most often, body size is a common sexually dimorphic feature. That is, the sex that's competing for mates is usually larger, and larger size is often selected for. Final thing for today is Darwin at the Olympics. So if we were at school, you did this as a group, but since we're not, do your best at home. So the last quiz question on the quiz on Google Classroom is a short answer one where you're going to modify the 100-meter dash so it becomes an example of natural selection. So write down whatever sorts of modifications or rules you would have to impose on this event for it to become an example of natural selection. When you finish this, do go ahead and submit the quiz to Google Classroom so I can give you points for today. Tomorrow we will do the lab for non-Mendelian inheritance traits, and then Thursday during second block you'll do the second antibiotic resistance lab, and Friday we will start reviewing for exam 4, which will be on Monday. The rest of next week will be spent reviewing for your final exam, which will be on the following Monday. So with that, I hope you are staying warm and cozy and have a great day today. I will see you tomorrow.